2 instructors, a Piper Warrior, a routine training flight that should have been forgettable. But then came one simple request: show me something new. Minutes later, the airplane's wings ripped clean off, the fuselage spun into a Florida neighborhood, and 21-year-old Fernando Macedo, just 9 days into his first instructor job, was gone. The frustrating truth? This wasn't weather or a hidden crack or bad luck. It was a reckless, preventable mistake. August 17th, 2023, Fort Pierce, Florida. A Piper PA-28 Warrior, November 9855 Sierra, took off around noon on a Part 141 proficiency check. In the left seat sat a 26-year-old Czech instructor, about 1,600 hours total time and very current. In the right seat was Fernando, just 21, a brand new hire with about 287 hours total. This was his final check before officially teaching students at Aviator College. The flight started exactly how it should. They went through Chandelle, Lazy Eights, slow flight, stalls, all by the book, and Fernando passed. Nothing unusual. But then came that turning point. Fernando asked, "Can you show me something new?" And here's the critical moment. Instead of politely saying no or sticking with the syllabus, the Czech pilot decided to improvise. He told Fernando he'd demonstrate an ISA maneuver. That was his term, a maneuver used in European training. The problem? It wasn't in the school's materials, wasn't required for the Czech, and wasn't even appropriate for the Warrior. This is the moment where the guardrails came off. In aviation, syllabi exist for a reason, to keep training safe and predictable. The second you go off script, you're freelancing. And freelancing is where accidents are born. Now, doing a stall recovery is perfectly normal, but what actually happened up there was not a stall recovery. The ADS-B data shows something much different and much worse. According to the survivor, he pulled power to idle, pitched up into a stall, and then recovered at glide speed, 73 knots. That's his story. Sounds straightforward enough, but the ADS-B track tells a completely different tale. In the last few minutes, the Warrior didn't just stall and recover. It made 4 steep turns, each one more aggressive than the last. By the end, the airplane was down to a 200-foot turn radius, whipping around at 99 knots. Do the math, and you get 70 to 75 degrees of bank. Now, here's why that's crazy. FAA guidance says steep turns should be 45 to 60 degrees. At 60 degrees, you're pulling about 2G, already doubling the airplane's weight. But this airplane, it's only certified to 3.8 gigahertz. Push past that, and you're in dangerous territory. At 75 degrees, you're not just nudging the limit. You're smashing through it. And airplanes don't warn you when you cross that line. There's no alarm, no vibration like a stall. Structurally, it just gives. That's what happened here. The right wing failed first, snapping upward under the load. That violent roll then overloaded the left wing, which tore off next. The stabilator at the tail ripped away too. Witnesses on the ground heard loud booms like explosions before seeing the fuselage corkscrewing downward with debris fluttering all around. One even caught video of a wing tumbling by itself. Think about how frustrating that is. The survivor thought he was showing a harmless stall recovery, but the data proves he was basically flying an aerobatic routine in a trainer that wasn't built for it. The Piper Warrior isn't a stunt plane, it's a normal category trainer. Yet here it was, being slammed around in 70-plus degree banks at nearly 100 knots. That mismatch between what he thought he was doing and what actually happened is the heart of this tragedy. So here's where some people immediately jump to conclusions. They hear in-flight breakup and assume, oh, it must have been an old trainer with weak wings. And you know what? On the surface, that sounds reasonable. A lot of these flight school airplanes have tens of thousands of hours on the airframe. But in this case, that theory doesn't hold water. When investigators took the wreckage to the lab, The metallurgical exam told a very clear story. Both main spars failed in ductile overstress, meaning the wings tore apart because the loads were simply too high. They didn't fail from a hidden fatigue crack suddenly letting go. They failed because the airplane was flown beyond its design envelope. Period. Now yes, inspectors did find small fatigue cracks in both spars, the kind you expect in a high-time training fleet. That's normal wear and tear. But those cracks were tiny, not anywhere near the size needed to cause a structural failure. In fact, none of the fractures started in those spots. They were just background noise compared to the massive overload that actually broke the airplane. And here's something else. This Warrior had already complied with the FAA's Airworthiness Directive 2020-26-16, which requires special eddy current inspections of the spar attachment bolts. It passed. Maintenance was up to date. So no, this wasn't old airplane equals dangerous airplane. This was a perfectly airworthy Piper that got pushed into loads it was never built to carry. Now, let's step back from the hardware and talk about the humans, because this is where things get even more frustrating. The survivor insisted to investigators that he was demonstrating a simple stall recovery to glide speed. That's what he remembers. But the ADS-B data shows something very different. Steep turns, aggressive ones, all the way up to 75 degrees of bank. That gap between perception and reality is important. Under stress, with adrenaline pumping and a cockpit literally coming apart, memory is often unreliable. He may have truly believed it was a stall recovery, but the data doesn't lie. And then there's the mindset. Think about it. A senior instructor with over 1,000 hours sitting next to a brand new colleague who's eager to learn. When that younger instructor says, "Show me something new," there's a subtle pressure to perform, to show off a little, to go beyond the routine. That's a hazardous attitude, a sense of invulnerability, the belief that I know what I'm doing. Nothing's going to happen. But the FAA's own handbook is crystal clear. Turns beyond 60 degrees in a normal category airplane are aerobatic, and aerobatics are flat out prohibited in a Warrior. So what happened here wasn't just bending the rules, it was crossing directly into prohibited flight. This is why standards exist, because in the moment, it's easy to rationalize, it'll be fine, I've done this before, just one quick demo. But airplanes don't forgive rationalizations. The Warrior didn't care about instructor pride or curiosity. It only cared about physics, and once that G limit was exceeded, physics won. Now here's the bigger systemic picture, because as much as this looks like one instructor's poor decision, there's more to it. Aviator College, the operator, didn't have a safety management system, SMS, or flight data monitoring, FDM, and they weren't required to. But that's part of the problem. If they had FDM, the kind of system that tracks ADS-B or onboard data for envelope exceedances, they might have spotted risky behavior earlier. If they had SMS, a formal way to manage risks, maybe they'd have had a culture that pushed back on extra maneuvers outside the syllabus. But without those tools, it all came down to individual judgment in the cockpit. And on that day, judgment failed. And this is where the NTSB has been banging the drum for years. SMS and FDM aren't just for airlines anymore. They're pushing to bring those tools into Part 135 operators. And frankly, flight schools should be next. Because Fernando's death wasn't just about one man's mistake. It was about a gap in oversight that left room for that mistake to slip through. So here's the question I'll put to you. Should SMS and FDM be mandatory for flight schools? Should we require data-driven oversight to protect the next generation of instructors and students? It's a debate worth having. In the end, the breakup of November 9, 855 Sierra wasn't a mystery. It wasn't a hidden crack. It wasn't bad luck. It was the result of one conscious choice, pushing a Piper Warrior far past its limits, and the price was the life of a young instructor, just starting out. What makes this case so incredibly frustrating is how preventable it was. Not a freak accident, not an act of fate, but a reckless decision that never should have been made. So I'll leave you with this. What do you think? Should flight schools be required to monitor their flights the way airlines do to stop accidents like this before they happen? Let me know in the comments. And if you want more deep dive crash analysis like this, hit subscribe, because there are always lessons to learn from the mistakes of aviation's past.